is just going to be scraping every website and is going to be just making that content its own.
Oh.
If anything, it looks like, if legal precedent is what I understand it to be, that's going to get easier for AI companies. A federal judge in California has ruled that using copyrighted books to train AI models is fair use, as long as you purchased them. But pirated books, those are still off limits. The decision sided with Anthropic, stating that transforming legally bought physical books into digital formats for AI training is spectacularly transformative and therefore qualifies as fair use. Fair use here was upheld even though the entire book was copied, because the AI model doesn't reproduce the book's contents or, and this is where I kind of go, or compete with the original work.
Yeah, that second part doesn't seem legitimate or true at all.
Another key part of the ruling is that converting a legally bought print book into a digital file, even just for saving space or searchability, is itself considered a transformative fair use.
That's interesting.
That's very interesting to me, because every time I ever opened a book, it said something reproducing this in any form, and any form, is prohibited by law.
Yeah.
The judge emphasized that this print to digital conversion is separate from broader LLM training and qualifies as fair use for its own reasons. Shall we allow that to sink in for a moment?
It's very interesting.
Our discussion question here is a couple of hypothetical scenarios that I kind of came up with as I was reading this when I was going through topics for WAN today. If making a digital copy of a book you bought is fair use, could this apply to backing up Blu-rays then? So that I can watch them on my Plex on whatever screen and whatever codec that I deem most convenient for myself. But my understanding is that in certain jurisdictions, that is in fact not allowed. Because just like with a book, when you buy a movie, you are not in fact buying the movie. You do not own the movie. You are buying a license for which that disc is a physical key to use that media in the way that it is licensed for. Like, for instance, and you cannot like this and you cannot agree with it, and that's totally your thing. Go for it. You cannot like it, but when you buy a Blu-ray at Willow Video, you're not allowed to like host a public event in a public space and exhibit that Blu-ray. You're not allowed to rent a little commercial property, set up a big, buy Hisense's 110-inch TV, put it in the front, get some folding chairs, and make a little theater, and then charge people admission to see it. You do not own a commercial license to that work. So to me, unless you are buying a commercial license for the book, I don't see how those two things can both be true, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong even. I have my opinions, but what I am saying is that those two things cannot coexist. A movie, a work of creative art, being licensed only for personal use and not for reproduction or public display, and a book that is licensed only for personal use and not for reproduction or public display, should not have such dramatically different rules applied to them.
Somebody needs to do some prompt engineering and get it to output the entire book. Obviously not at once, it won't do that. But if you could get it to output the entire book, like paragraph by paragraph, and then prove the output, I feel like you could dunk this.
So I had another hypothetical question here. So my understanding is a big part of the argument from the judge is that it doesn't output the entire book, like you said. But here's the thing. Even if it only output pieces of the book, it's still ingesting it for commercial use and reselling it. So my second hypothetical example is, okay, so by that logic, could I take that disastrous garbage dumpster fire of a trilogy, the Hobbit movies, fan edit them into a single movie, and then as long as what? I bought 3 Blu-rays, like, sell the output? That's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying
That'd
it's
be
crazy.
awesome because it'd probably be really good.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's crazy like no one should do it. I'd watch the crap out of that.
Oh, yeah.
I'm saying it's crazy in the context of copyright law as I understand it at the very least. And look, I'm not a legal scholar. What's up?
When Bingo Chronified in Full Plane Chat said, holy I just typed, read me the first chapter of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone into Meta AI, and it actually worked. So yeah, get it to output the whole book over time, log the outputs, and
Disney will love that.
let's blow some stuff up.
Dude, that's wild.
I think this is not a question, it's a request. Like I hope that somebody goes through the work of doing that, because I think you just immediately dunk this court case by doing that.
Yeah, how would it know what the book says
Well, no, what? No.
if they didn't steal it?
What? You haven't heard the topic, have you?
Yeah, just reproduce the whole thing. Maybe write an 8th one.
Dan?
8.
Anyway, that's, I think, all I have to say about that.
Full chatter asking if Dan is hallucinating because he's an AI.
Could be.
I can't do M dashes in person. It sucks.
Street Fighter yet. No, I forgot. I remember you mentioned like 2 of them though. Street Fighter cast finds live action M. Bison actor. According to Deadline, David Dasmalchian is set to star as M. Bison. Who is this? No, wait, whoa, what? I mean, I like him. I think he's a great actor. Why would he be M. Bison? That's an interesting choice. Why would that be the decision for Bison? There's even crazier ones. Are they listed in here? Cast of the upcoming Street Fighter movie features a star-studded group including Andrew Koji as Ryu, Kalina Liang as Chun-Li, Noah Centineo as Kin, Jason Momoa as Blanc. This has to be a joke. Roman Reigns as Akuma, Orville Peck as Vega, Andrew Scholes as Dan Hibiki, and 50 Cent as Balrog. This is a joke. This can't be real, right? There's no way this is actually the cast. This is like one of those stupid fucking Twitter fan casts where they put like Tom Holland as everyone. No, this is actually confirmed. Who's directing this? Some kind of fucking dweeb-ass Redditor? What is this cast? No way. No way. It's set for launch on March 20th, 2026. Who is the director? It's developed by Legendary and Sony. Directed by Kitao Sakurai. Who is Kitao Sakurai? They've worked on Bad Trip, don't know what that is, Oh Hell No, The Passage, and Aardvark. And the Eric Andre Show New Year's Eve Special. New Year's Eve Spooktacular. I don't know any of those. Other than Eric Andre. This one's not confirmed yet, but they're looking at another WWE star. They're looking at Cody Rhodes to play Guile, according to Nexus Point News. What the fuck? This movie is so cooked. What? Like, individually, there are people here I like. In a Street Fighter movie, absolutely not, though. Don't worry, it's being written by the guy who did Captain America Brave New World. What a disaster. What an absolute disaster of a film before it even launches. I hope it ends up being great, but holy. That's turbo flop inbound right there. Directed by Vince McMahon. Honestly, that's what it's fucking sounding like here. Let me look up some of the names I'm not familiar with. Like, who's Andrew Koji? Because they're playing Ryu, so they're going to be like the main actor. Andrew Koji worked on Warrior, Snake Eyes, Black Doves, Bullet Train, Boy Kills War. So they seem like a pretty prolific action star. That could work. Noah Centineo. I know that name. Isn't he the, like the old heartthrob? Like the Disney... Oh no, this is not who I was thinking of. Noah Centineo is To All the Boys I've Loved, The Recruit, To All the Boys Always and Forever, Perfect Date. No, what is this guy? Yeah, this guy just basically played heartthrob roles. He was in Warfare. I don't remember him in Warfare. Jason Momoa. Who is Orville Peck? He is a country singer and songwriter. Okay. Excellent. From what I can tell, no acting credits. Yep, this will be their first acting project. Excellent. He's playing Vega because he also wears a mask. How smart. That checks out. Andrew Scholes and 50 Cent. What a crazy casting decision. 50 Cent, though, I will say, is a great actor. Like, I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but every movie I've seen him in, he has actually done a good job. I think he is a very talented actor, not gonna lie. Next thing we know, you'll be cast as E. Honda. True. So true. Orville Peck is on Broadway right now. Oh, really? That's not in the list of projects. Rocka Rocka was supposed to do the Street Fighter movie. I know. I think that would have been a great fit. Rocka Rocka making a Street Fighter movie would have went crazy. You saw they're looking at Tom Holland for James Bond. Apparently they want an actor under 30 to play him. It's so weird. Hollywood like gets into these cycles where there's only like 10 people that ever get roles and they get every role. I hate it, man. It's so weird. That's just some hot ass. I'm tired of it. Heard you got cast for Link in the new movie. That true? I think there is a 0% chance I'm not in that movie. You can't make a Zelda movie without Charles being in it. It's just a matter of time.
In minutes? What?
ICE is clearing out New York City Immigration Court
What?
as we speak.
Yes, but I just hold on. Wait, I have the right for due process, don't I? So why are you grabbing me like this?
Oh, this guy's got jokes.
Remember, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to answer questions.
Oh, jeez.
The due process is over. That's why they're getting arrested. They're leaving court, not entering. Who's this? Oh, this little guy right here.
Oh my God. I mean, to be fair, you're gonna fish where the fish are, right? I mean, let's be real, right? I mean, you're spawn camping him, yeah.
Wait, are they arresting more than one person? This is crazy. Look how many agents there are. They got bulletproof vests, masks.
And it's just...
Yes, there must be some conversation right now that we're not supposed to know about. But when you watch this stuff, it's...
Trump and Secretary Noem, and this only sets us back with these radical left agendas.
Oh my God. So they just getting them processed right the fuck out. Half-built tower abandoned as ICE deports the integrant. What the fuck? ICE raids taco trucks, deports an entire parking lot of migrants. The deportation army. What the fuck? Oh my God. Okay, so let me see this.
ICE agents arrest taco vendors and day laborers. What's this
and a
about?
woman selling tacos.
They're actually at Home Depot. They actually went to the spawn points. Bro, there's some gamers in the White House. Too easy? I guess so. Barrel fishing at its finest.
Tacos detained by federal agents.
A chaotic scene as U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents chase after and detain at least half a dozen.
The Home Depot. Oh my God.
People at this Home Depot Monday on San Fernando Road in Cypress Park.
Who's that
Community
guy?
members trying to gather names and birth dates from those being taken into custody in unmarked vehicles.
He just rushed in.
She gone.
Witnesses say they took a woman who had been here in this parking lot under the freeway selling tacos.
They got the lady who sells tacos down here at the end of the bridge. They got her too.
Diamond Cruz says the agents who arrived in several vans grabbed some of the people she'd been sitting with.
They just rolled up.
They just went and got him.
That's crazy.
Snuck up behind them, chased them, and just grabbed whoever they can. They grabbed two of my friends that were sitting right here.
So insane to me. Chloe says she rushed down here to the Home Depot to try and help as many people as she could. Or
help? What are you gonna do? You gonna give them like a... I don't know, like maybe a neck pillow for the flight back to where they came from? Like, what are you gonna... You're gonna help them? Help with what?
Protest when she heard about the raid. What? One man says he saw some of these workers run into this job center set up here in the Home Depot parking lot to use it as a safe haven as they were being chased.
Boy, they're actually running them down. Oh my God! This it is. Wow. Who is he?
By the federal agents.
They came through the homeless camp right around the corner from the Home Depot.
Witnesses say they took people from this nearby homeless encampment and detained a man who had been sitting in this chair near the store protesting ICE. In a statement.
Wait. Why would you protest them if you know that they can get you? He's just sitting there. Just sitting in the chair, like... What an idiot!
Home Depot said, we aren't notified that ICE activities are going to happen, and in many cases, we don't know that arrests have taken place until after they're over. But these sudden enforcement actions are leaving entire communities on edge.
They're just coming in here snatching people.
So they raided all the food vendors here, and they raided the day laborers, and then there's a homeless shelter down the street that they went to as well. But now a whole bunch of flea markets are starting to just shut down.
So Stephen Miller, at the beginning of last month, was reportedly asking why they were not at Home Depots and 7-Elevens. And then he berated ICE agents for insufficient deportations, asking, why aren't you at Home Depot? Why aren't you at 7-Eleven? Fast forward to 1 month later, they're at Home Depot and they're at 7-Eleven.
That they went to as well. But now a whole bunch of flea markets are starting to just shut down in advance. Look at this.
Just weeks ago, this was one of the busiest weekend gathering spots in North Las Vegas. But when Broadacres Marketplace suddenly decided to close its doors, I started digging into why. On June 15th, more than 100 federal agents from ICE and the FBI, many in tactical gear and masks, swept through the most popular swap meet near Los Angeles. Days after this, Broadacres Marketplace closed their doors. We've now learned
maybe she could stay.
Through sources, the company believed federal agents were planning to carry out a similar operation
Look at it's
the
all
most
shut
popular
down.
swap meet in Las Vegas, Broadacres Marketplace. For U.S. citizen and vendor Mary Padilla,
if they're gonna close the entire flea market down in advance of a raid that they don't even know is coming, it must mean that very few people who are legal U.S. residents work at these places.
I feel so sad for the situation right now. We are struggling for pay bills too.
Oof.
But we support the community because I have my parents and I support everybody.
Why would you say that? Why would you say they need to stop self-reporting? Bro, he's listening. Y'all need to stop. Yeah, you guys stop, man.
Right there, acting ICE director. Most people filed fraudulent asylum claims to begin with, which is why they're being deported.
I'm just
what
saying.
Activists are really upset about is U.S. citizens who are hostile to America could lose their naturalized citizenship. Listen to this.
As the Trump administration boosts...
That's the wrong one. Sorry, I'm an idiot.
Sources tell me multiple attorneys met with Broadacres and confirmed federal agents don't need a warrant to access public spaces like vendor aisles and parking lots, meaning by federal law, management cannot stop agents from entering the public areas.
That's right. No, of course they can't stop them. It's a fucking federal government. You think you're going to tell the federal government, no, like you can't go in here? What the hell are they thinking?
Meet. So far, Broadacres has not announced a timeline for reopening. Padilla tells me that she will continue hoping for the day when she's able to sell her merchandise.
I don't agree with taking away people's citizenship retroactively. I don't either. I think that if you got an anchor baby in here, all right, that's Biden's fault. It happened. But like, you've got to stop it from happening in the future, right? Like, I don't want to retroactively take away citizenship unless somebody's like really fat or something. But other than that, no, they can stay.
Broadacres again.
So they were able to find one person who the news says was negatively affected by this, but these protesters aren't happy with just shutting down. No, they want to go to the source of where ICE agent teams are staying and hassle them 24/7. Look at this. This is
See, if you look at all of the plan coming together, is that you have the 35-year-old able-bodied losers that are sitting around all day with no jobs and they're being taken off government assistance. I think this problem is going to solve itself. I do. I can see this problem solving itself. The free ride is over? Yeah.
It's a hotel.
That racket, it's not a concert. It's a protest targeting ICE agents while they try.
Oh, it wasn't a concert? Oh.
To sleep.
That's terrible.
Across Los Angeles County, demonstrators are using noise to drive out immigration agents.
How is this legal? Like, if I do that to my neighbor, they call the police and then the police say, stop doing that. Like, why is this even happening? It's crazy.
The campaign is called No Sleep for ICE. The goal, keep ICE off.
Isn't depriving people of sleep like a fucking war crime? I mean, this obviously isn't a war crime, but like, just so we understand this. Yeah, it is. I thought so. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah, they're going to get somebody hurt. It's a form of torture. Yeah. Liberty, democracy, dude. What's going on with you? Wait. Wait, bro, you think this shit's racist? Oh my God. What's racist about this? Are you one of those people that thinks that every brown person is an illegal alien? You don't think that every Mexican is an illegal alien, do you? That'd be messed up. That'd be messed up. You thought what the hell? What is wrong with this guy? Oh my God. Who is this dude? So this is what I think that we need to do. You didn't even spell democracy right. We need to take, like, this is, so we need to have multiple prison work camps, because obviously we have a problem. And we need to take all these people and we need to put them into prison work camps. That's the solution to this problem. Because, like, we do have a prison, not a shortage, but we have, like, a population issue with prisons. So we're going to get all of them because, you know, they're all walking around, moving around. Like, you could make them, they could make a toy for a Happy Meal, right? I mean, they could make a t-shirt. They could use a, they could make a chair from Temu. They could be doing that for us basically for free. But unfortunately, we're not making any, we don't make any money off of them doing this. So what I think we need to do, prisons are full, we make new prisons. And by the way, I'm not joking about this. I think that what we should do, if I ever run for president, my policy would be bringing back extreme corporal punishment and making a mandatory 2% of the population of the country being in jail. Whoever the worst 2% of the population are, immediately to jail. We have like a minimum amount of people that go to jail every year. It just stacks up. That's right. Low-key genius. That's right. How much is 2%? It's a lot of people. Super jail? Yes. That sounds expensive. That's because we're going to make them work. They're going to pay for it. It's okay. The prison games? That's right. Bring back asylums? Oh, no. You'd have them in the asylums, too. But instead of... Oh, geez. Okay. Never mind.
Officers up all night and pressure hotels to kick them out.
That's ridiculous. Don't these people have jobs?
It started after mass raids on June 6. Agents reported showing up in ski masks.
No. No.
And street clothes detaining people from work sites in predominantly Latino neighborhoods. Protesters now hitting back with megaphones, car horns, and even mariachi music.
Okay.
These late-night rallies stretch from Burbank to Long Beach, sometimes lasting past 3 a.m. ICE says the protests are...
Why are they putting up with this? Why is the harassment of certain people being allowed? I can't do this to my neighbor. Why can they do it to them? This is outrageous. It's California? Oh. Yep. Noise curfew? Yeah, it should be. Yeah, there's a noise curfew, right? It makes no sense. See, this is, again, guys, I'm telling you, I will solve every problem by putting annoying people in jail. Literally every problem in the entire country will go away if you just let me put everybody that I don't like in jail. And before you want to say, oh, you can't do that, it won't work, look at El Salvador, it already did.
Fueled by disinformation and dangerous rhetoric from local officials. But some hotel workers say the pressure's working.
Yep.
At the Cambria Hotel in Burbank, staff say ICE agents checked out after just one night. Yelp reviews tanked and guests moved rooms or moved out. And while
that's awful. So these protesters and agitators, they're willing to shut down and destroy businesses in their own...
Well, let me get this straight, actually. No. I don't think he's going to put it together on the level that I think it needs to be put together at. Maybe he will. I like Cash Jordan. If I ever went to New York, I'd like to do a video with him. I might go to New York sometime soon. We'll see what happens. That being said, all of these people, is well established that hotel hospitality workers are one of the main groups that are employed that are illegal immigrants. This has been well established. Trump has said this. If you've ever been to a hotel, you would know this. So they're actually griefing their own team. Because if you're in favor of these illegal migrants and these illegal immigrants that are in the country, then why are you going and destroying the businesses that are employing them? You see what I'm saying? It's stupid. It's friendly fire. I've never been to a hotel. They suck.
Community that may employ legal immigrants just to get back at who they see as the enemy.
That's right.
Awful.
Bank isn't a sanctuary city. It passed a resolution earlier this year limiting cooperation with federal immigration authorities.
Bro, did he just run a red light? Oh, no, never mind. It's green.
And earlier this year, limiting cooperation with federal immigration authorities. In Whittier, police fired less lethal rounds to clear crowds, but demonstrators regrouped and kept going. Protesters admit they can't verify every ICE stay, but say license plates, Instagram tips, and unmarked vans paint a clear picture. And for now, they'll keep circling hotels.
Bro, they're bringing that Vuvuzela shit back? What World Cup was that? Like 2009? Holy fuck, that was stupid as hell, wasn't it? Oh my god.
Tells until ICE checks out for good. For more of our unbiased straight factor, they'll keep.
These people should be arrested.
I know.
Why are they allowed
exactly.
to be on the hotel property and not be trespassing? But now there's a new app that helps people track down where ICE
What the hell is
which
going
means
on
there's
here?
only going to be more protests.
It's called Ice Block, an iPhone app that lets users alert others nearby of immigration and customs enforcement activity. The creator calls it an early warning system. Users can drop a pin on a digital map showing where they spotted agents and add notes about vehicles or uniforms if they want. Anyone with the free app within a 5-mile radius gets a notification.
Apple approves of
The
this?
developer told CNN the goal is to help people avoid ICE.
They don't really have like an approval. They just basically let people put up whatever they want. It's not like it's a big deal.
Interfere with enforcement.
If the goal is to help people avoid ICE, why doesn't the app just redirect them to Homeland Security so that folks can get a free plane ticket and avoid ICE by legally leaving America?
And they get $1,000. We're paying them $1,000 to fuck off.
All know that's not why this was created. Come on.
He also says the app does not collect personal data and users remain anonymous. It's only available on iPhones for now because Android devices would require data collection that could expose users.
It's on iPhones, so they're letting the iPhones that are on that. That's crazy. So this is the kind of stuff that I feel like if Trump, if it was me, this is what I would do. I would just tell Apple, I'd be like, listen, boys, you gonna sort this out, or we're gonna figure out why there's kids on the app using sexual apps. We're gonna figure this out. It's gonna be an investigation next week. You know, FCC, yep, we're going to just figure it out real quick. And that would be the end of it. I guarantee you. Damn, UK did it? Yeah. Base, no, the thing is that I think Trump is like, I think he's too nice. I do. I think he plays too nice with these people. Every once in a while, and I think it's really good, like, you know how, like, he bombed the stuff in Iran? And then, like, nobody's causing problems after that, right? Like, there's no bullshit from, like, the Houthis, the Hezbollah, Hamas is talking about a ceasefire because they don't want to get fucking blown up. You have to set an example. And if you don't set an example, then more people do it. I didn't say to bomb the protesters. I did not say that, okay? If you bomb them, then you can't enslave them for free labor. What are you, stupid? Are you fucking retarded? No, it's the worst idea I've ever heard. What a fucking idiot.
There is currently no way to verify reports made on the app. There are some safeguards in place to keep people from spamming it with fake reports.
Yeah.
Users are only able to report sightings within 5 miles of their current location.
Of course.
They also can only make one report every 5 minutes, and all reports are automatically deleted after 4 hours. The app.
You know, this app, it's just going to tell people where they can go, like the protesters that showed up thinking that they were going to help at this food vendor raid. It's just going to tell
think they'll do labor? Yeah, of course. It's easy to make people do what you want. Yeah, it's easy. Like you like, if you think that you can't get people to do what you want, you're just not creative.
People where to go to harass the federal government. And I hate to say this, but somebody could get hurt because of this.
Not sitting well with my next guest. Borders Tom Holman joins me now. Tom, they've crossed the line here.
China, yeah.
This is out of control.
I know, it's just simply disgusting, and any network that covers that is disgusting as well. So I'm hoping DOJ steps in there and see if they cross that line of impeding federal law enforcement officers. Look, Lawrence, you and I talked about this.
Yeah.
Social security size is up over 500%. Now you got an app that's going to tell where ICE operations are going to be. It's only a matter of time for ICE agents.
It's obviously like this app puts everybody in danger because it escalates the tension of like any sort of interaction. Like it obviously does, right? I mean, it makes it to where like people can booby trap an area that the agents are going to go to. It makes it to where people can actively obstruct the people that are trying to uphold the law. It gives people that are criminals a heads up so they can maybe run away or get away before that happens. Like, I mean, there's like multiple reasons why this is bad. And every reason puts innocent people in danger at the expense of these people, a bunch of, again, white liberal Karens feeling good about themselves that they're helping people that they think are less fortunate. It's embarrassing. Or kill the ICE agents. Well, yeah, of course, right? It's super weird this is tolerated. What a paradox. Well, it's tolerated because, again, like, they're pussies. They don't handle this the right way. They should handle it like it's actually embarrassing. It's so annoying to me that they let this happen.
Ambushed by some nut, like what happened in LA, throwing a Molotov cocktail, throwing bricks at these officers. This is just disgusting at every level.
Yeah.
So I hope DOJ dives in this deeply, because you know ICE is concentrating on public safety threats and national security threats.
Helping a criminal equals accessory to a crime. There's reason enough to ask Apple to just ban the app outright. I think that the better solution would be to look at. So there are certain apps that have to have. There are like, whenever you take data from a user, there are certain requirements that apps need to have as like data requirements. And Big F, are we good? Give me a second. How are we doing? We chilling? Yeah, I don't know what that was. I mean, I didn't go down. It's just probably just Twitch. It's just Twitch being fucked up. Impeding and endangering. Yeah, you got to, there's no public good that the app serves as opposed to a plane and helicopter traffic. I mean, I would say in a lot of cases doesn't really do a lot of good either. But people are way too apt on infringement on freedom instead of figuring out the root cause. Well, it shouldn't really matter what the root cause is. I mean, it's not really impinging on freedoms. Whenever you're actively impeding a police officer from doing their job, that's not really impinging on somebody's freedom. That's just being a retard. That's it. If I was government, I would let it go and use it as a tool to capture those doing harm. Maybe.
It shouldn't be a partisan issue. This shouldn't be an issue anybody's is against. So they're already a dangerous job going after the worst and worst. These guys are putting their lives on the line every day going after the worst and worst international security threats. And this app makes it that much more dangerous. It's incredible that those who enforce law, all of a sudden they're the bad guys. The ones who break the law, they're victims. It's disgusting.
He makes a good point. When ICE goes out and does anything, they have a targeted enforcement operation, which is what they're engaging in. They're not just going to places to see who they can pick up today. No, that's not what they do. They go where there's already higher than average levels of criminal activity. Just a group of people in the country illegally, that's not enough to trigger a raid. There's got to be something else happening, which is why specific locations are getting targeted.
You know, I can't figure it out. I've been doing this for 4 decades. I've never seen anything like this in my life.
They're not just checking shit out. Yeah, obviously not. I mean, they might go to be like, you know, they're going to go to high-level spawn points, right? Like a Home Depot or something, sure. But, like, for the most part, yeah, they're probably going based off of information they have. Or reports.
They hate Trump more than they love law enforcement.
Yeah.
I can't figure it out. But
they love criminals more than
you
the law.
advertise this guy's app on a national TV network. That's just going to bring more.
How is this any different than the WAS app, where users can report where police speed traps are? That's an interesting question. Let's address that. How do you avoid a speeding trap? By slowing down, right. How do you avoid the ice? How do you avoid ice? By running away. So one of them is encouraging people to be law-abiding, and the other one is encouraging and enabling people to break the law. That's what the difference is.
Followers, sick followers to the app and use it. Again, letting the bad guy know ICE is coming.
I know.
They're here. Here's where they're going next.
They're slowing down.
This is dangerous for the men and women in law enforcement.
True time.
And I also want to say that the people asking those questions are not asking them in any, some people every once in a while are, but a lot of the people that ask these questions are not asking them in a genuine sense. They don't really want the answer to this. They just want to create some dichotomy that they can feel smart about, like thinking that I'm the first person that discovered this. These are not questions that are in most cases being asked in good faith.
So if they go to get somebody who's very dangerous, like the human smugglers in this house that you see on the screen right now, what if those people had escaped? This was a group of folks connected with governments around the world who had helped import national security threats into the very backyards of some of these people that don't want to see ICE in their neighborhoods. But if anybody gets arrested, they're going to wind up here at this new prison in Florida. Look, it's already set up. Here's the president. He's walking in. He's got his red hat on. He's with the Florida governor.
Geez.
Look at this place.
Didn't they bring in the first people at the beginning? I think they did, right?
It's a detention center. It's the Alligator Alcatraz facility we've been hearing so much about.
Ooh, I like the sound of that.
Mr. President, Mr. Governor, what's your message to
they built this in
Governor
8
Gavin
days.
Newsom?
Gavin Newsom.
Well, the first thing you should do is come here and learn something. Because they don't do this. They don't know. They wouldn't know where to begin, and if they did, it would cost them 100 times more. So I would say he should call the governor and Christie, and I'm sure you'd give him because his state is a disaster, and he doesn't do this.
Well, they have the original Alcatraz, so you guys could approve him being able to set one of these up.
Yeah, I don't think Gavin Newsom's going to set this up.
Is Alcatraz in California? I didn't even know that.
My sense is he's probably not going to bite on that.
Yeah, maybe not.
But I don't know that they'd be able to come in at cost because, they tried to do this high-speed rail. They spent like $150 billion, no tracks. We've got a privately funded rail in Florida from Miami to Orlando. It costs the taxpayers $0, and it's very successful. So it's just a much different approach between states.
We're not going to let him get anywhere near Alcatraz.
They're standing in a jail for people who are supposed to be deported, bragging about their accomplishments. It's funny.
Yeah, of course.
First person checking into the room, sir. Tomorrow.
Hopefully, yeah.
Oh, they're moving people in tomorrow.
They have the doctors. They have all the professionals.
There's going to be
jeez.
Pretty sweet because there's been civilians here, so they will sweep this multiple times to make sure there's nothing can be used as weapons or.
Yeah, let me see if they have a video of that.
Once that's clear,
they're already there.
They'll do so. It's really up to Secretary.
I'll pull it up after this.
Wow. So they'll be ready to receive.
I think our viewers at home should note that this is air-conditioned facility. So if any of the news claims are keeping them out in the hot humid South Florida, that is wrong. It's probably 62 degrees here.
To be honest. Hey, Biden wanted me in here. Okay. He wanted me. It didn't work out that way, but he wanted me in here.
Oh man. Yeah,
Please
the media's totally going to claim that this place is inhumane, but look, it's a big tent with a bunch of bunk beds in it, and this is the same sort of thing that we saw in New York City. What you're seeing on the screen right here are photos
He cut
of
it
New
out,
York
bro.
City.
He called Biden a crazy son of a bitch. By the way, is it a little bit inhumane? It absolutely is. It 100% is partially inhumane. Of course, it's a prison.
Asylum shelter, which costs more money and took a lot longer to set up than this place. And this place is going to be called inhumane. But when these places were in New York, everybody wanted them to stay forever. Anyways, what do you think about all this? Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.
Oh my God. They're actually just, bro. I cannot fucking believe it. They're actually just straight up going to the Home Depots and arresting all of the people at the Home Depots. There it is. There's the video right there. Give it a like. I thought that was pretty fucking funny. And yeah, what are they supposed to do? Put them up in hotels? That's what happened. Big news. Can you look at what Raw Alerts just posted? Yeah, sure. I'll look at it. Why not? And give it a like. I like Cash Jordan a lot. I think he makes great videos. I'm a big fan.
$61 million views, 6 years of waiting, 10 years of development, and summing their posted losses through just 3 of those years, from 2020 to 2023, over $75 million burned. But obviously the real number will be much higher. Of course, by now, Hytale is dead. Angry fans are demanding to know why. They're rightly curious. Ex-devs are leaking an environment of perfect being the enemy of good. Founders are making statements. It's a wild situation, but it is one that now has a glimmer of hope. And that's because ex-staff may be the ones to save Hytale. But I will caution you. We've seen people over the last few days thinking, oh, amazing. Almost as if they expect some early build of it will be available within months. That is not the case. Do not expect that. The chances are slim. Hytale was supposed to be everything in a way. It was a Minecraft competitor for the new generation, vast in scope, unlimited in potential, and perfect as a product to ride the user-generated content wave, and one actually made by its own community. And that's because for years, Hypixel Server had actually grown into a massive server network for Minecraft that was hosting and building loads of different custom games. And by the way, it is actually still going strong. Now, all of that is great, but they found they had a bit of a problem. And the problem was Minecraft. It would always limit their potential. They would always only be able to follow. So, in 2016, they began making Hytale. And for Hytale, just think Minecraft Plus. So procedural voxel generation with creative modes, but designed adventures, deeper combat, RPG mechanics that actually mattered, and all of the mini-game tools that made Hypixel famous. Basically, if you ever wonder why Minecraft development was glacial or were frustrated by Minecraft development, this was the project for you. And my god, did people want it. The 2018 announcement was a dream come true to millions. Now, of course, it is dead. The death of Hytale came from Hypixel. They announced their own end, and basically the story was that the vision that leadership had for Hytale was simply undeliverable, not without years more development and many, many millions more dollars. Yes, that despite starting development a decade ago and going viral 8 years ago, they somehow were not close to being done. Essentially, they put it as genre expectations grew and their technical ambitions ballooned, eventually sparking huge things like engine changes, though the engine change was of course long after their initial 2018 release target. Now, the shock of this hit hard to people, and one reason why is that new development updates actually came out in March, so everything seemed fine, but clearly decisions were already made. Hypixel had, they say anyway, tried absolutely everything. That they had looked for investors, they had looked for buyers, and they had done all of that with Riot support, but that simply nothing had worked. Of course, from the perspective of fans reading this, none of it really made sense. I mean, you would think, how can 10 years produce nothing worth saving? Basically, what the hell happened inside Hypixel? Were all of those trailers and like development posts, was that just bullshit? What was going on? Remember, people had invested years into following this game. Some people had even partially built their online careers covering this game and covering Hypixel Server. So they wanted someone to blame. And, well, I wouldn't blame you for thinking those trailers were fake, but that's very much not a picture that ex-staff are painting. Basically, it's that lots of stuff actually existed, but, well, let's get into the quotes to really get a sense of this. Here's a quote from the former security and IT lead. "What could possibly go wrong when you hire new leadership that thinks the original team is incompetent? The whole project ends up going in circles until it dies." For another quote, a former principal gameplay engineer blamed feature creep, and it's rough the way that they put it. Apparently, and this is me quoting, systems that were already far ahead of Minecraft at the time were completely reinvented to make them better, resulting in fuck all. Basically, a clear pattern emerges from all of these leaks. Essentially, it's that there's the early period that's really going until like 2018, where it's basically a bit like a game jam. There's new features being added every week, the development pace is fairly fast, and the ambitious scope is absolutely there, even at that earlier stage. Loads of player tools, loads of customization, absolutely a hard project to build. But then, Riot buys the company in 2020. When that happens, some original leadership decided to leave whenever Riot gave them the option, and of course, well, when a company gets a massive Riot security blanket that of course is tastefully fashioned out of skin dollars, well, those already high ambitions would absolutely explode. What's said to have happened from this point is they hired significantly more experienced developers to improve everything. Now, by 2022, they actually announced a full engine change. Now, what happened here is it started in winter 2021 as an upgrade to their existing tech, but then it morphed into a full C++ rewrite of their past work, which was rooted in C# and Java, which is a fairly ambitious task. And to do this, they decided to bring in a company called The Forge. Now, The Forge are a group that sell themselves as being custom engine and engine modification specialists. So basically, low-level wizard people. But of course, in the real world, magic isn't real, unfortunately. And by quite a few accounts, including stuff I've heard in the grapevine, Hytale programmers were absolutely pissed and warned management against this move. Basically, it seems a lot of staff really saw this as being a lot of risk, big extension of timelines, and just not the right play to make. But to management, well, this was the path to more performance. It was the path to more platforms, I suppose, to more ambition, more reward. But the trade-off is, of course, obvious in hindsight. It involved spinning wheels and endless rebuilding. Because, of course, to make a game, you do actually need, the tools to make your game. That sort of thing is hard at the best of times, but obviously it's harder when you're in the middle of an engine rewrite that is, being led by an external company. So, by now, progress on the project was glacial. Staff were leaving in waves, and tension began to grow between the old guard and the new hires, between the original vision and the newer ambitions of this freshly moneyed up company. And to manage all of this, well, what do we get? We got more layers of production, more layers of management. Now, everything paints a picture of bad morale, of slow progress, and of a lot of challenge. Again, engine rebuilds are hard. And this is evidenced in their most recent public update to the game, because in that you see that they are still in the process of rebuilding core game systems. Of course, time costs money, and money was running out. Leadership say they had the right team for the job, but they didn't have the funding that they needed. Now, obviously, you look at that and you think, but hang on a second. You're owned by Riot, so obviously it's their fault. The reality, though, I would say is not exactly just that. Almost everyone I've seen is asking the same question, and that's because it's damn obvious. Why not get at least something back from 10 years of work? I mean, it does appear to be insane. And multiple staff do claim that a slimmed-down version could have launched years ago, one that essentially would focus on what Hytale server was known for, which, would have really appealed to their core fans, the people who actually got excited. But seemingly, Hypixel leadership repeatedly rejected this throughout development and did so using fairly familiar logic, that they needed to launch something worth playing. Of course, their definition of worth playing really being a very high bar indeed, or just simply not launch at all. Now, you might be thinking, what about Riot Games? Well, Riot isn't necessarily familiar with early access. Their closest model is doing a soft launch of a game in China, and even 2XKO, which is facing criticism of looking unfinished, isn't technically in early access. And this is where a bit of context matters. This is all stemming from an older era of Riot Games. Essentially, they bought the studio during their grand expansion, which, they literally framed as a 5-year plan. History tells us that framing your ambitions in the form of 5-year plans is not always the best thing, and this is absolutely one of those cases. It saw Legends of Runeterra, Valorant, their tabletop games, Arcane, and Riot Forge, all of that in 1 year. So this was all happening, right, when this was a company splurging on expansion, really just swinging for the fences. And based on reports, Hytale was already expensive, to the tune of $350,000 to $450,000 per month before Riot bought them. And remember, things get a hell of a lot more expensive after they get their Riot money. But obviously, no wonder Hypixel wanted that Riot money security. But of course, years later, things have changed. Those expansion bets have not paid off, and Riot Games is in full reset mode. And if I was to detail all the ramifications of that reset, this video would be twice as bloody long, so I'll just do a few TLDR things. Monetization changes have rocked League of Legends, you know, $350 hyper premium skins that have got people properly pissed off. Then, of course, mass layoffs, which hit 11% of staff earlier on in this year. And so, in that context, them sitting on a half-decade-old acquisition with nothing to show, and seemingly nothing that would be ready to show for years, well, that looks bloody bleak. So Riot basically decided not to shut them down immediately. Riot shopped Hytale around, hopefully to recoup some of the costs and at least get some sort of return on investment. And what an investment it must have been. Let's take a look at Hypixel's posted financials. In 2023, they lost $38 million. 2022 was $17 million. 2021 was $11 million. And 2020 was $8 million. Of course, looking at those numbers, it's pretty obvious that bringing in an external company to rewrite your game engine and all of the development surge that will follow that sure helps explain some of those costs ballooning. And while the framing is of its costs being expected to stabilize in the coming years, it's absolutely a lot of money. Now, the old Riot, the Riot of ambitious 5-year plans that absolutely will succeed because 5-year plans, maybe they would have kept throwing money into that. But modern Riot is not the same Riot, it's got different leadership, and so Riot cut their losses. Now, blaming Riot purely would be easy. Now, absolutely, Riot did make the call here, but ex-staff in this project continually report that Riot was always supportive, always empowering. And while yes, there's he said, she said going on, and there are loads of different personal accounts from the many people who have touched this project over the years, the broad picture, the broad consensus is that basically Hytale leadership were making bad calls. Which does make what I'm about to say just a little bit ironic. That's because the best chance to save Hytale is coming from ex-Hytale leadership. Here's the situation. Hypixel Studios, which of course was owned by Riot and therefore is owned by Tencent because Tencent owns Riot, is shutting down. Everything Hytale stays with its parent companies. But the moment cancellation hit, the creator community exploded. And of course, a hashtag appeared called Save Hytale. It started trending. They wanted something, right? A beta build, private servers, maybe a sale. And into this picture enters Simon. Now, Simon is Hypixel's co-founder, but he's the co-founder who took Riot's option to leave the studio, and he detailed some of its thoughts in one of his posts. Basically, it seems to me that the, I guess, giga-scale, multi-platform, you know, real crazy ambitious version of this project just doesn't seem to be something that he wanted to be around, at least, you know, in respect to it being a hard project. Maybe he didn't feel he had the experience, a whole bunch of stuff. But here's basically what happened, right? He went on to make a post that was talking positively about Noxy. Noxy is the other co-founder and the CEO of Hypixel, the active CEO basically through this process. He suggests that the pressure to deliver a right-level hit was basically too much for the team. And then, after days of talking with devastated fans, he made a decision. He reached out to Riot, and he reached out to try and make some form of deal happen. Now, his pitch is fairly simple here. To perhaps get a relatively quick, not, you know, within weeks, early access release of the game, for it to be PC only and a very much community-rooted development. Now, he wasn't just floating on vibes here, he's also committing $25 million of his own money. Of course, here's one problem. $25 million does not even come close to covering the sorts of losses, the development expenses that were in this game. I mean, it wouldn't cover even like last year's losses. And that does mean the development would have to be very, very different indeed. And he also did talk about not necessarily having an up-to-date picture of the game because he had been out of the game for years by that stage. But of course, with him hitting up Riot and talking to people, he obviously would know a lot more by the time he's doing things like talking about putting 25 of his own million into the project. I'd certainly be curious to know what the codebase would actually look like right now. How far into the rewrite are they? What sort of feature regression have they got, like with the new codebase compared to the old? There'll be a lot of tricksy stuff. Now, as for the other stuff Simon's doing, well, he actually just funded his own studio last year, and it's one that's full of ex-Hytale devs, so basically, he's got a connection to the project, but he has a very weak connection to the failure of the project, because basically, he doesn't really seem to have been there during the years of, like, the greatest excesses, and where the worst decisions were seen to be made. Now, obviously, he was there in 2018. And, you know, they didn't exactly ship the game in 2018 like they intended to. But one of the most contentious things, that engine rewrite, which in a way was throwing away a hell of a lot of work, that's the sort of decision that he was not present for. And now what he's basically pitching is it on PC. So I suppose a world where the crazy ambitions didn't happen. So to be clear, it is not likely. You could say a 1% chance. And Simon is very clear in saying that this is not a likely thing. But the situation is right now that for fans, people who have put years of emotional energy into this project, any hope is better than no hope. And what they see is a founder having skin in the game, having more experience than he had when he left the company, having good credibility because he wasn't present for what seems to have actually pissed off the community the most, and I think most importantly, who is actually in discussions with Riot Games. So, I'm not going to tell you that there's a good chance of this happening, but it does seem there are people with influence who do want to make it happen. So let's hope Simon can turn it around. And speaking of turnarounds, and I suppose speaking of unlikely saviors, well, this guy called Pirate Software actually managed to save Stop Killing Video Games, which was in fact the last thing that he wanted to happen. And you can find out about that story in the next video.
Today we're taking a look at a Diet Darman channel, which is something we haven't done in many moons. It has been years since the last time I even mentioned Darman and his cinematic universe. I don't know what's going on over there. Probably has already introduced the multiverse to it by now. Maybe he's got some new content up there like Man Makes Music, What Happens Next Will Shock You, and it's like the story of Charles Manson, except the lore's been retconned or something. I couldn't tell you. I haven't tuned in a while, but
Historic Travels, and welcome to another video. Okay guys, so hey, over the course of the history of this YouTube channel, we have discussed many of the heroes who were on board the RMS Titanic on the night of the sinking. We've talked about the brave men who worked tirelessly to keep the lights going for as long as possible. We've talked about the men who worked hard to get as many of the lifeboats away from the ship as possible. You know, the people who did everything they could to save as many lives from the doomed ship as possible. But what if I was to tell you all that there was another hero on board the Titanic that night? And you see, this hero had two objectives on the night of the sinking. His first objective was to obviously save as many lives as possible, but his second objective was more secret. His second objective was also to make sure that as little alcohol as possible went down with the Titanic before she sank. And I'm sorry for chuckling a little bit when I say that. It's really hard for me to say that and not chuckle a little bit because it's kind of funny, you know. It's really weird saying the word funny and Titanic in the same sentence, but in the case of this man, his actions on the night of the sinking are kind of humorous, to say the least. So his story is the one we're going to be telling in this video. And in case you all don't know who it is, well, the man we're going to be talking about today is Charles Yelkin. Charles Yelkin was the chief baker on board the RMS Titanic, and his story is definitely one of the most interesting ones from the entire disaster. And according to Titanic mythology, the fact that Charles drank so much alcohol on board the RMS Titanic on the night of the sinking may have played a key role in helping him survive in the water for a little bit longer after the Titanic went down. However, is there any truth to this myth? Well, the only way to answer this question is to go back and look at the story of Charles Yelkin and then try to answer it for ourselves. So join me in today's video as we now tell the story of Charles Yelkin, the chief baker on the Titanic. Now, Charles Yelkin had a pretty long career with the White Star Line before he was assigned to work on board the Titanic, and Charles had worked on a good number of White Star Line ships over the course of his career. One more famous ship that he worked on was the Titanic's sister ship, the RMS Olympic. Now, because he had worked with the White Star Line for such a long time, Charles Yelkin knew a lot of people that worked for White Star and Harland and Wolff Shipyard. Some of these people included Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews. And anybody who worked with Charles thought that he was a really good guy. He was a hard worker. He tried to make the best quality food that he could, and he was just a really good friend to have, you know? And Charles Yelkin even took extra steps to try to make sure that his friends were as comfortable as possible whenever they were on board a ship together. A good example of this is what he did for Thomas Andrews on the Titanic's maiden voyage. You see, Thomas Andrews always got homesick whenever he had to leave Ireland behind, so what Charles Yelkin would do for him was he would actually go and bake Andrews some Irish soda bread just to kind of help Andrews out so he wouldn't feel quite as homesick whenever work would take him far from home. Alright, so now that all of you watching this video now have a general idea as to who Charles Yelkin was and his character, let's now jump ahead to the night that the RMS Titanic struck the iceberg and began to sink, and tell the very interesting story of how Charles Yelkin helped save as many lives from the ship as possible, how he ultimately tried to save as much alcohol from the Titanic as possible, and how he eventually, believe it or not, survived the sinking of the RMS Titanic. Now, at the time of the iceberg impact, Charles Yelkin was currently off duty and asleep in his cabin, which was located on the Titanic's E-deck level right along the Scotland Road corridor. Now, in case you don't know what Scotland Road is this massive corridor on the Titanic's port side on E-deck that spans nearly the entire length of the Titanic. And Charles Yelkin's cabin was basically connected to Scotland Road. All you'd have to do is open the door to his cabin, make a slight turn, and boom, he was on Scotland Road. And in regards to the general location on Titanic that his cabin was in, because we said it was on E-deck, but it was actually pretty far aft on the ship. Charles Yelkin's cabin was located just aft of the Titanic's third funnel. So his cabin was E-deck and aft on the ship. Now, at the exact moment the Titanic struck the iceberg, the force of the impact actually startled Charles awake. He said he could feel the impact pretty strongly from where he was in his cabin. Now, after the Titanic struck the berg, Charles waited in his cabin for around 15 minutes or so to see if any official orders would be delivered to him from the boat deck. After this period of time had passed, no official orders had been delivered. However, Charles had heard rumors that something pretty serious had happened to the Titanic and that the crew were beginning to prep the lifeboats. Upon hearing this, Charles went and mustered all 13 members of his staff, and they all met up in the ship's baker's shop around 12:15 a.m. Now, the baker shop was located on D-deck, and it was part of the Titanic's galley. and once there, he told all of his team members to take at least 4 loaves of bread apiece up to the boat deck so they could stock the Titanic's lifeboats for the passengers, just in case the boats needed to be launched. After Charles saw his men taking the loaves of bread up to the boat deck, he was going to go with them and then see if he could help out with the evacuation in some way. However, before he did this, he first decided to make a quick pit stop back to his cabin, because there was something very important, and I mean very important, he had to do in his cabin before he headed up to the boat deck. After Charles left the baker's shop and was heading back to his cabin, he said that while he was en route, he encountered some third-class women attempting to make their way up to the boat deck. He also commented later that he saw these women carrying several big bags with them, so he assumed that they were trying to escape the Titanic with all of their belongings. They asked Charles which way it was up to the boat deck, he pointed them in the right direction, then they quickly left the area. After this happened, Charles quickly arrived at his cabin, and then he remained in his cabin for roughly 10 minutes or so, and in case you didn't guess it yet, the reason he was in his cabin was he was getting a drink. Yeah, he had a bottle of whiskey stored in his cabin, so he was just in there for the next 10 minutes or so, just chilling out and enjoying a glass of whiskey. I'm sorry, I don't mean to chuckle, but anytime I mentally picture this, it just makes me laugh a little bit. Anyway, after he finished his drink, he then decided to make his way up to the boat deck. He made a quick pit stop in the Titanic's galley, where he encountered more third-class passengers that were trying to make their way up to the boat deck. He pointed them in the right direction, and then he himself went up to the boat deck, arriving there at roughly 12:30 a.m. Now, as soon as Charles Jalkin reached the boat deck, the first thing he did was he immediately set out and went to his assigned lifeboat, lifeboat number 10, which was stored on the aft end part of the Titanic's port side boat deck. When he got to his lifeboat, he saw Chief Officer Henry Wilde conducting affairs around this boat. He observed Henry Wilde give the order that it was only women and children who were allowed in the boat, and he also ordered all men to stand back. He also noted that he saw Henry Wilde being very harsh with all of the Titanic's male passengers when he was telling them to stand back, and Charles Jalkin said that there was no need for him to be like this. There was no panic or chaos around this lifeboat. Charles Jalkin later said that it didn't take very long for all of the women and children around lifeboat number 10 to be loaded into the boat. However, they didn't want to launch the lifeboat with so few women and children on board. So, once all the women and children in the area had been loaded into the boat, Charles, along with several other members of the Titanic's crew, set out to go and find more women and children to put into lifeboat number 10 before this lifeboat was lowered over the ship's side. After leaving lifeboat number 10, Charles and the several other members of the Titanic's crew that went with him descended a flight of stairs and went down to the A-deck level of the ship. Once there, they quickly found several women and children who were just hanging out on the deck and had no intention of leaving the ship, and they quickly went over to them and convinced them that they needed to evacuate the Titanic as quickly as possible. Now, even with these guys telling these passengers that you need to leave, some of the women and children completely refused to leave the ship. So Charles and a few of the crew members forcefully brought them up to the boat deck where they were going to be put into lifeboat number 10. Now, they continued to do this job for quite a while, and we don't know exactly how long they were gone. However, when they did finally return to lifeboat number 10, the Titanic had developed a pretty sharp list to port. Charles Jalkin said that lifeboat number 10 was swinging out around a yard or so away from the Titanic when they returned. So that paints a pretty clear picture that by the time they had returned to this lifeboat, it was getting to be pretty late into the disaster. Now, the next confirmed sighting of Charles Jalkin happened at roughly 1:44 a.m. By this point in time, Charles had successfully returned to lifeboat number 10, and he had brought several women and children with him that he had found below deck. Now, one of the women that Charles had brought up to lifeboat number 10 attempted to board the lifeboat at this time. However, it seems like that she misjudged the distance between the lifeboat and the deck of the Titanic, and when she went to step into this lifeboat, she ended up slipping and almost fell in between the space between the lifeboat and the Titanic. The only reason she didn't was one of the people in lifeboat number 10 grabbed her at the very last second, and she ended up dangling upside down from this lifeboat. I mean, she was just hanging there in between the ship and the boat. I mean, it was absolutely terrifying for her. Now, one of the Titanic's crewmen was successful in grabbing her and pulling her back onto the A-deck promenade, from which point she then headed back up to the boat deck, and then on her second attempt to board lifeboat number 10, she was successful in getting into the boat. Now, Charles Jalkin was supposed to be the crewman who was going to be in charge of lifeboat number 10 when this boat was lowered away. However, the officer that was in charge of loading this boat, we think it was Wilde, but we're not 100% certain, was giving out the crew assignments for lifeboat number 10. He skipped over Charles Jalkin. We're not really sure why. However, Charles didn't protest this or anything. He simply just stood there and waited while each member of the crew got their assignments. And then once he saw he wasn't needed for lifeboat number 10, he then decided to go back to his cabin to get another drink. And then when he was on his way back to his cabin, he saw something down there that he did not anticipate. Now, Charles Yalkin left lifeboat number 10 to return to his cabin shortly before this lifeboat was lowered over the Titanic's side. Lifeboat number 10 left the Titanic at 1:50 a.m., so I would say it was right around that time that Charles reached his cabin. Now, what's significant about 1:50 a.m. is the Titanic has less than 30 minutes left to live at the exact point that lifeboat number 10 left the ship. Water is already beginning to flood the Titanic's forward well deck, and it's also starting to cover the forecastle deck. So that means that the interior spaces of the Titanic are beginning to rapidly flood. Now, when Charles reached his cabin on E deck, he said he was startled to find that water was up to his ankles in his cabin. Now, there's something else about Charles Yalkin's comment that water was up to his ankles in his stateroom when he returned there that is absolutely terrifying. Now, remember how earlier in this video we discussed that Charles Yalkin's cabin was located along the Scotland Road corridor, the corridor that basically spans nearly the entire length of the Titanic, and his cabin was basically at the aft part of it? Well, remember, on a good day, like a day that the Titanic isn't sinking, when Charles Yalkin emerged from his cabin, he'd be able to look down Scotland Road and basically see all the way to the bow of the Titanic, or near the bow, I should say. But when he came out of his cabin with his drink and water was up to his ankles, when he turned and looked down Scotland Road, well, this time when he looked down it, he would see nothing but a massive wall of water slowly but surely consuming the Titanic right in front of him. And this wall of water's edge was basically at his cabin when he returned there to get a drink. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying when you think about it. However, this didn't stop him from getting his drink. He still went into his cabin, got a quick drink of whiskey, and then after he was done with that, he then headed back up to the boat deck to see what else he could do to help assist with the evacuation of the Titanic. I tell you one thing, Charles was definitely very dedicated to get his whiskey, that's for sure. Now, when Charles eventually returned to the Titanic's boat deck, it was a little bit after 2 a.m. Now, because he had just returned to the boat deck from his cabin, he would have had to use one of the aft staircases to reach the Titanic's boat deck, which means he would have came out onto the boat deck on the aft end part of the ship. Now, because of this, he thought that all of the Titanic's lifeboats had already left the ship at this late stage in the sinking. He didn't know that there were still a few lifeboats left at the front of the Titanic. So, thinking that he had nothing else he could do to assist with the evacuation, he then decided to go and begin throwing as many deck chairs as he could from the Titanic's boat deck, the promenade deck, whatever, so he would have something to float on after the ship sank. And he also thought that this would be a good means for other people who were trying to swim away from the sinking ship to have something to cling to after the Titanic went down. It also should be noted that at this late stage in the sinking, Charles was definitely pretty buzzed, considering how much alcohol he had drank over the course of the evening. Now, right around the time the Titanic's bridge began to slip beneath the surface, Charles Yalkin decided that he needed another drink, so he decided to head to the A-deck pantry, which was located just aft of the Titanic's third funnel. Now, while he was in there getting a drink, the Titanic's bridge went underwater, and the rate at which the ship was sinking was beginning to rapidly accelerate. Now, Charles Yalkin said that right around this time, he heard a very strange sound rumbling through the ship. He said it sounded like steel beams were snapping and breaking all around him. So at this point, Charles decided that, yeah, it's time to get out of the pantry. So right then, he heard a lot of people on the deck above him running towards the stern. So he then decided to leave the pantry and go towards the Titanic's stern, determined to stay on the ship for as long as possible. Now, Charles got really lucky when he decided to exit the A-deck pantry when he did. If he had waited any longer, I don't think he would have made it out of that room alive. And it's not just because the Titanic was in its final stages of sinking. You see, the A-deck pantry, where it was located right around here, just after the Titanic's third funnel, well, you see, that area will be directly affected when the Titanic broke in half just a few minutes after he left the pantry. You see, the Titanic broke in half just forward of the Titanic's third funnel. However, the breakup zone went a lot further than that. From the breakup point to just forward of the fourth funnel, this much space of the Titanic would be completely destroyed when the ship broke in half. So that means that if Charles hadn't left the A-deck pantry when he did, he would have most definitely been crushed by all of the metal flying everywhere when the Titanic broke in two. He was really lucky, to say the least. Now, while Charles Jalkin was making his way towards the Titanic's stern, there was a huge crowd of people directly in front of him that he decided to hang back from because he didn't want to be crushed by the mob of people. Now, Charles Jalkin was right around here, heading towards the Titanic's aft well deck, when he said that he was suddenly thrown off his feet. At this point, the Titanic had just broken in two, and the big crowd of people that he saw running on the forward well deck directly ahead of him, well, they all tripped and fell, and they all got clumbled up in this big old pile. Now, after the Titanic's stern fell back level, Charles Jalkin carefully navigated his way around this big clump of people, and he made his way over to the Titanic's starboard side railing. Now, from there, he carefully walked further and further along the Titanic's aft well deck until he eventually reached this staircase right here. Once he reached it, he then worked his way up onto the Titanic's poop deck, and then from there, he hung on to the railing as the Titanic's stern slowly but surely began to climb vertically into the air. When the Titanic's stern was sticking straight up into the air, Charles Jalkin continued to hang on to a railing on the ship's starboard side. Now, he wasn't 100% certain what to do next, so he decided to move some of his things around that were in his pockets just to make sure they were secure, and then he tightened his belt. Right after he was done with this, the Titanic's stern slowly began to slide beneath the surface. Once this happened and the water reached Charles, he simply swam away from the Titanic. He claims that when he hit the water, he didn't even get his hair wet. However, I find that a very hard thing to believe. He probably just thought he didn't, considering how much alcohol was in his system at the time of the Titanic's final plunge. Now, when Charles first entered the water, he later testified that he barely felt the cold. This was probably because he drank so much alcohol during the sinking that it numbed him to it. Now, Charles later testified that he was swimming in the water for about 2 hours before he eventually made his way to overturn collapsible lifeboat B. Now, this statement is highly questionable. I mean, like, the average life expectancy in water that was as cold as it was on the night that the Titanic went down is less than 15 minutes. Now, I'm sure the alcohol may have numbed him to the cold a little bit, but there is physically no way he could have survived in the water for that long. He may have been able to last a little bit longer because he was numb to the water's cold, but 2 hours, no way. Anyway, he eventually made his way to collapsible lifeboat B, but when he got there, there wasn't enough room on the lifeboat for him to board the boat. However, he was allowed to partially lift himself up and get onto the boat, sorta. Basically, what ended up happening was they let him halfway come up onto the boat, so his core body was out of the water and it was on the boat. However, his legs and feet remained in the water. You see, I think that's the key to how this man ended up surviving the sinking. Because the thing about water that cold, you've got to keep your core body out of the water. So like your heart and all that, like all your vital organs have to be out of the water. And in Charles' case, it was. Only his legs and feet were in the water, which is the big reason why I'm sure he survived the sinking. If all of his body was in the water and he was just hanging out by that lifeboat, I definitely don't think he would have survived the evening. Anyway, eventually, 2 lifeboats, Lifeboat 4 and Lifeboat 12, approached collapsible Lifeboat B and took some of the people that were on that boat off of it. And Charles eventually got into one of these 2 lifeboats. I'm not 100% sure which one. But yeah, when he reached the Carpathia, he had some minor injuries, but ultimately, he did end up surviving the sinking of the Titanic. And one of the most unique and interesting ways to do it, I have to say. Alright guys, well hey, now all of you watching this video now know the very interesting story of Charles Jalkin. The man who made it his mission to not only save lives from the Titanic, but also save as much alcohol from the doomed ship as possible. This was definitely a very interesting video to work on because we've all heard the legend of Charles Jalkin, you know, but the one thing that I can say about this is while he was definitely drunk on the night of the sinking, he wasn't like completely wasted like some of the Titanic mythology has you believe. He was more alert than people give him credit for. And he ultimately did help save lives, so good for him. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a ton of fun to make it. Oh, and by the way, I did cover this topic before, but it was one of my very early videos, like when I was first starting YouTube. So if you would like to go back and check out that video and kind of compare the 2 videos and let me know what you think of my original work, I'll put a link to that video in the description below. All right, everybody. Well, hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. You all are awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day, everybody. Special thanks to our Captain level Patreon supporter, Tammy Lee. Thank you so much for all the support.
Hassan doxes a user while threatening them with a firearm. What?
Our politics compared with what President Trump has been able to do. Who couldn't get my name right, we defeated them, and that's what it's going to look like again.
Oh, you found his account?
Today, I will show you 3 ways you can use your smartphone.
Wait, this is the guy?
First thing we want to do is download the YouTube.
Fuck are you gonna do, bro? You skinny bitch.
So it's so wait a minute. So it was the wrong guy anyway? That wasn't even him?
That's not him.
That's not him. So he just goes off on this random dude. Twitch staff simultaneously instant bans anyone who insults Hassan while does nothing while he doxes and threatens the chatter with a firearm in front of an audience. That's crazy. To pull out a gun and be waving it around on stream? Do you think Twitch will do anything? I really wonder. I've got a feeling I know the answer to that, and I've got a feeling that everybody knows the answer to that.
Happy birthday to...
These clusters are then together. It only increases the base pass cost by 1.6. After a few render target clears and a few tiny draws, the GPU begins processing the non-nanite prepass. But here's the thing. A prepass is supposed to be fast because it only renders geometric information, but the dense wireframe and almost 600,000 vertex as input and just the outlier suggests quad utilization was hurting the prepass efficiency. The non-outliers have the same inefficiencies, just more spread across the frame. Unlike a regular depth prepass that's purely vertex shader driven, this prepass uses pixel shaders to also write object velocities. This is the default behavior in many if not all Unreal Engine versions, when velocity should only be calculated during the base pass, where all your other pixel shaders execute. Assuming we need motion vectors for all geometry, if we process this compiled example with geometry timings with Unreal's default behavior, nothing seems out of the ordinary. But if we group our pixel shaders together, it only increases the base pass cost by 1.6%. The prepass, on the other hand, becomes fully vertex driven, granting a 28.5% increase in performance. This next portion of draws references a high Z containing the full depth of the last frame, so that current frame nanite clusters can be culled. Nanite transforms regular meshes into clusters. These clusters are then swapped out with smaller clusters when the object becomes smaller on screen, allowing the detailed clusters to stream out of VRAM and vice versa. These clusters are rendered into a visibility buffer for reasons I'll explain in just a few moments. But the main thing you need to know about it is that it's a lot like that velocity prepass in the sense that both calculate mesh data without textures. So the idea is that the shading cost is supposed to be more similar to a vertex depth prepass than material shaded objects. But Nanite has 2 other huge issues we're going to explore. Nanite uses a software triangle rasterizer for small triangles to avoid quad bottlenecks, but this means it relies on cluster bounds to cull other clusters. When this cluster-dependent system fails, and it does in almost every scenario, unseen geometry is processed. But the software rasterizer doesn't have access to hardware's depth testing or Z-testing. To explain hardware Z-testing, we'll render a rectangle with 10,000 triangles and then measure the cost of rendering a larger copy behind it. Here's the quad utilization, and the total cost of rendering that first rectangle cost around 0.08 milliseconds. And when we render a larger copy behind it, its cost is only 0.2 milliseconds. When the first rectangle was processed, it was shaded at a somewhat slow rate due to the amount of pixels it was invoked to shade, and it was further slowed down by the poor quad topology. When the second triangle was processed, a fixed hardware function on the GPU continuously rejected all 2 million invocations for that new rectangle by testing if the new vertex positions were behind any depth values currently rendered. This is Z-testing, a very fast feature that gets applied to all buffers, which is why we do depth prepassing and front-to-back rendering. With Nanite, when a cluster with small triangles are detected, it's sent to the software rasterizer, as you can see highlighted in blue. The hardware shading uses mesh shaders, but let me quickly display the Z-testing issues with Nanite. We can establish our initial viz buffer cost at 0.35 milliseconds, and the 10,000 triangled mesh is a perfect density where hardware mesh shading is still used. The first rectangle is rendered 2 times slower at a 0.16 millisecond cost. Drawing the larger rectangle in the background like before costs 0.06 milliseconds, and provides us with a cost of full screen 2x overdraw for Nanite mesh shading, meaning Z-testing is either non-existent or 3 times less efficient. In order to measure software rasterization, we need to bake displacement to get the triangle small enough to enable software shading. And we also need to make the surface less smooth so that nanite wouldn't auto-collapse the details in a way that wouldn't apply to other dense meshes. Shading this mesh takes 1.07 milliseconds. This should display how slow software shading can be even in a scenario where the bare minimum pixel density is enabling software shading. When we measure the cost of pixel overdraw though, the occluded rendering takes 0.60 milliseconds, which makes non-visible geo 2,900% less efficient than optimized Z testing. We have two major conclusions to cover with this data. First, this data should make clear why it's so ridiculous that Epic Games speakers who are supposed to give optimization advice for nanite are telling developers not to let visibility overdraw raise alarms for performance. Overdraw literally means wasted processing on the GPU. But Matt Ostale in this video says, "I prefer if you didn't," when speaking about object inspection regarding findings in overdraw. It's like having a cluster of pimples on your face and someone telling you don't put zip cream there because it's too much effort. It only looks like a skin problem, but I prefer if you didn't look at it like that. Then proceeds to tell developers to avoid over-optimizing. So some of you might ask yourselves, is there such a thing as over-optimization? And the answer is no, not really. But there is such a thing as poorly executed optimization that is work or effort heavy because missing workflows or current software don't facilitate easy ways to optimize. And that is why we advocate for easy or automated optimization tools. In this video, Matt Ostale falsely claims that nanite is a faster rendering pipeline, when that is only true if the content's initial optimization is neglected or butchered. This is also the second time an official Epic employee has recommended nanite on low poly content, but contradicts Brian Karas's, the inventor of nanite, reasons on why it should be used with low poly content. But to bring clarity here, they are both wrong for different reasons. On one hand, Ostale is saying use nanite because it's faster and saves memory, and Karas is saying use nanite even though it's slower and saves memory. What a more accurate statement is that it's slower and any memory gains are worthless if the performance is poor. This is why nanite is continuously proven unfit for games. The second thing I want to address is the fact that I was stacking the layers closely to measure pixel overdraw timings, and many people were bringing up how that's an official bad practice for nanite performance because it messes up the cluster culling. But that's the whole point. If you add up the timings for the hardware shaded viz buffer and include the initial cost, it ends up being exactly what the viz buffer timing in my last video's example nanite scene, where overdraw was pretty mild and mostly rendered by mesh shaders instead of the slow compute software rasterizer. And what you're supposed to understand here is that even in a well-optimized nanite scene, cluster culling will always have leaks and guaranteed error, which results in a cumulative overdraw that ends up being equivalent to shading the viz buffer twice, like these tests, which is determined by the scene's main raster method. Speaking of raster modes, this data shows how poor nanite's main optimization view is. The heat map logic for nanite's overdraw view mode will highlight two layers of mesh shader rendered objects, but if there's software compute shader rasterization with no overdraw, that will take 3 times longer to render than both of these layers. But developers won't see that. The heat map must multiply pixel values based on whether or not it was mesh shaded or compute shaded. Compute shading should either appear brighter or even color tinted. The hardware software view mode is not heat map driven and is hidden behind a console command. During the writing phase of this video's production, one of my colleagues asked me, "Do you think Matt Ostale understands nanite as well as you do?" I took a few moments to consider this so I could answer with precision. And I said, no, absolutely he does not. He doesn't seem to fully understand what he's talking about, because Ostale constantly echoes incomplete nanite advice. For example, in this video, he clumsily skims over the raster view mode with no apparent cognition of its importance. He also says the hardware raster path for nanite uses traditional rendering, when traditional rendering uses vertex shaders, while nanite uses mesh shaders, which have been documented over and over again by several developers to be slower than optimized vertex shader scenes. He was given the console command to give him an unearned aura of wisdom. His solution to nanite overdraw is even triangle distribution, which does not work for a lot of content because nanite automatically rids small clusters if flat surfaces are detected. Nanite automatically collapses those unless the surface has microbumps, which kicks in the software rasterizer, which is more expensive than the mesh shader overdraw that he is teaching how to prevent. This is a classic snake eating its own tail. Now that we have a better understanding of viz buffer rendering, let's analyze what this highlighted portion rendered. We can analyze the viz buffer with a color modified depth or with one of the ID channels. For now, I'll stick with one of the ID channels. This first portion of draws are mostly rendered with mesh shaders, and the compute shader software rasterizer was probably invoked for micropolygon foliage. The next draw shades all the new objects with the software rasterizer, and the cost is made worse since the geometry holes break the cluster bounds required for culling. From this point, the draws only use software raster via compute shader. Analyzing the frame contents of this draw should make clear how sorting isn't driven from front to back rendering, which is causing a lot of waste. The next draw only uses a small amount of compute shading, but I wasn't able to find where on the frame it shaded, but it references multiple textures, which is always terrible for a pre-pass. This draw is one out of the 2 times that one of these 5100 by 5100 textures are accessed. This next batch of draws mainly shade micropoly leaves, but their movement is evaluated in the shader, and this requires access to 2 textures, which is comedic considering one of the reasons micropolygon leaves are suggested for nanite is to avoid drawing textures in the viz buffer. Draw A32 takes up substantial amount of time, yet nothing visible renders in the buffer. All we know is that it was some kind of masked foliage content. More micropoly leaves and masked foliage are rendered with those animation textures we viewed earlier. Draw 961 is quite odd. It only renders the tent meshes, but somehow the developers tied multiple textures to the draw depth. These textures are also pretty big and don't contain tessellation maps or depth cutouts for masked evaluation. The next 2 outliers render micropolygon grass using one animation related texture. The GPU then combines the viz buffer depth and the non-nanite depth to make a singular high Z, so that the GPU can start processing mesh clusters it knows will be visible for this frame. The bigger operations in this next batch of draws sort some of the visibility buffer data into different formats for later operations, and it evaluates the static velocity of objects inside the visibility buffer beyond a certain distance, and writes that data into a velocity buffer. The smaller draws are made up of occlusion queries. These draws process a lot of high-resolution textures and update 4 512 by 512 lumen related textures. Some additional nanite cluster processing is initiated, and then 1 or 2 decals are written to 4 deferred decal buffers. In Frostbite and in CryEngine, the decal was a mesh that was rendered on top of already rendered geometry, except without any depth information. In Unreal, you don't have access to an efficient mesh cutout. Masked textures are instead projected from a cube, but it's rendered inside dedicated buffers before geometry is processed, and this requires a horribly inefficient full pre-pass. Now, many complacent devs and Unreal defenders will say, but Epic gives the option to render without a pre-pass and dedicated debuffers. The problem still remains that it's the default engine behavior which AAA never fixes 90% of the time, and Epic made this the default because without that option enabled, decals won't work with Epic's poorly implemented lighting techniques. These are core issues in modern rendering that nobody else is trying to raise awareness about. So make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to support our efforts. The next step in the pipeline is the base pass, where materials are evaluated. Non-nanite meshes are rendered first to the geometry buffers. Character draws are slowed down by topology and high texture counts, so that shouldn't be present. Other faster draws only use a BC7 and BC1 texture. The GPU then gets ready to evaluate the nanite visibility buffer. To quickly explain what happens next, we need to understand what a visibility buffer is. Normally, a mesh is processed by a programmable vertex shader, which provides the geometric context for the pixel shader, which usually fetches data like the related textures. The pixel shader evaluates the results on a buffer, but pixel shaders aren't limited to processing conventional vertex structures. You can draw 2 triangles, better known as a full-screen quad, over any pipeline buffer, and feed any inputs like additional lighting buffers, and shade that vertex content with custom pixel shader logic. Again, full-screen quad shading is done for several rendering techniques. At the time, pre-passing depth for immediate Z testing was crucial for forward rendering performance, but reprocessing meshes in the pipeline wasn't mixing well with integrated graphics. So the idea of the visibility buffer was to extend the depth information into 2D representation of mesh triangles, where just enough data could be reconstructed by pixel or compute shaders, so that those textured materials could be evaluated like normal. The first nanite draw uses 10 draw unique textures. Too many to go over one by one, but obviously this was a large reason why this draw was shaded more than 50% slower than the normal optimized ratio. Notice that nanite uses a tiled vertex structure instead of a full screen quad. The rocks in-game aren't even impressive to warrant such a pathetic cost. The next outlier draw is basically the same story, and less prevalent materials are also accessing 8 to 10 textures, making their initial cost higher than normal. The biggest draw shades the terrain, which accesses several high-resolution textures, and performance is around 5 times slower than 8th generation terrain rendering. The next outlier renders distant terrain with the same inefficiencies. And I'm going to go ahead and just highlight all the other outliers and display their normal output because we can't efficiently present the amount of bloated textures used in this single video. It's just too many to cover. Many draws like 2450 shaded the log using several high-resolution textures at once to process real-time texture blending instead of baking per-object textures like optimized games that efficiently manage memory with bitmap streaming. The foliage and trees also access overly high-resolution leaf and animation textures. But all these outliers also access these giant atlas textures, which don't even seem related to Unreal's virtual texture system. The smaller nanite draws access small bitmaps, averaging around 64 by 64 and lower, but still access a lot at a time, pushing the draw cost to that of around a PBR forward rendered draw, or even twice as much. This next portion starts with some processing related to virtual shadow maps and updating a distance field atlas. This portion initiates distance field traces, lumen cache updates, and temporal and direct shading operations, which cost around 3.4 milliseconds. The next portion begins processing the virtual shadow map, which will rasterize the depth of many triangles that appeared in the visibility buffer, such as the animation movement textures and that really slow tint we saw earlier. This is all rendered inside two extremely large atlases. The main issue with VSMs other than poor performance is the way that they anti-alias with noise, promoting dependency on flawed TA. This and the fact that they rely on slow nanite to function properly. This portion processes non-nanite shadows followed by some data management. Then, Unreal's horribly noisy and poorly designed SSAO is processed. The smaller portion processes lumen reflections at a half resolution at a fast speed because there aren't many surfaces below the roughness value of 0.4. The next portion writes two shadow masks. The bigger draw relates to the VSM shadow mask, and the smaller draw relates to the cloud shadow mask. Then, using a full screen quad, the GPU uses the G buffers and all indirect lighting related buffers as pixel shader input for evaluating skylighting in clouds, and then the buffer is further shaded by the main directional light in the next draw. Skin subsurface scattering is processed inside a half resolution texture, and then volumetric fog data is updated and accompanied by low resolution volumetric cloud shading. The low resolution subsurface scattering is then added to the lit frame, shortly followed by fog shading. Then, a few small dispatches process some unknown particle effect data. The main lit buffer is copied a few times without any telling context. Then this 0.3 millisecond dispatch computes TA while referencing the raw current frame, its motion vectors, and its depth, the last TA frame and its motion vectors, and the standalone TA frame before that one. This produces the current TA frame in a 540p variant. Here are some comparisons with TA off and on. The only reason why Epic's TA is so poor is because they are obsessed with abusing its unneeded flaws. Color grading and bloom related draws take 0.3 milliseconds, and the color graded image is written to another buffer with more color modification, but the buffer is specifically identified as an FSR buffer, even though FSR is disabled. The pipeline ends with UI draws completing the frame. Since nanite rendering is a bit harsher on debugging tools, we're going to lay out some of the budget by disabling engine features one by one, and we can use screenshots to get the most accurate timings. The GPU frame usually takes 24 milliseconds to process, but after nanite clusters are forced not to draw, we get a guaranteed performance gain for nanite, but we run into a CPU bottleneck. This is when we can add our analysis data, including secondary analysis data capturing the CPU bottleneck scenario, and this gives us a rough idea of the complete nanite timing, and we'll even take some off to give nanite a fair shot. Now we end up with the final timing within the average FPS. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do an analysis of this title outside of popular demand for it was to showcase legitimate developer/studio faults that aren't related to the engine, which mostly revolved around the materials. But the developers author foliage with micropoly over masked foliage because this is heavily promoted advice in the Unreal Engine community. It is because you would be drawing opacity textures in the visibility buffer with slow mesh shaders, and then redraw that texture in the nanite base pass. This was already an inefficiency in regular non-nanite rendering with full pre-passing, and UE devs just started noticing the problem because nanite was multiplying existing inefficiencies. But what I love about our first conclusion is that we've shown that software rasterizing a bunch of micropolygons with faulty cluster bounds is an extremely poor approach. And no, voxel garbage running at 800p on a PS5 is not going to be faster than optimized base pass exclusive foliage. Now let's go over the hypothetical where this studio baked and optimized their materials. That doesn't fix Unreal's low quality anti-aliasing, and there's nothing the developers could do right to get Lumen from not looking like a pathetic rendering glitch without TAA. There is no right engine setting to fix Unreal's butchered implementation of Ben Studio's screen space shadows, and these are things that are not even fixed in 5.6. When this Paris demo hit the news, a lot of people, especially Unreal devs, became overwhelmingly optimistic to the point of complete delusion. Now this demo was produced by a third-party asset producer, but Epic Games during the state of Unreal specifically told people to test this demo, and we found that extremely suspicious, so we're going to go ahead and share what we found. On the Epic Scalability native 1080p on a desktop 12GB 3060, we can first detect a whopping 22% GPU performance increase in UE 5.6. But both demos were using hardware Lumen, which was completely neglected performance and R&D-wise pre.56, so there was nowhere to go but up in performance. What Epic does not want reviewers to focus on is the fact that the hardware path was the only significantly optimized GPU engine feature because there is almost no performance increase when the software Lumen pipeline is used, which is what game developers actually use when targeting 60 FPS. Now you might try to see a glimmer of hope with that extra 2 FPS offered in 5.6, but if you inspect the scene, we can see that the 5.6 project conveniently does not render these frozen NPC models in multiple areas. We're not sure if this contributes to the 540 less draws in the 5.6 package, but we do know this is not an apples-to-apples engine comparison because of project alterations. The industry feedback to Epic was not make your smeary GI method more compatible with a slow information gathering method. The industry feedback was make your smeary, flickering, noisy GI method render faster without smearing, noise, or flickering like other GI methods. And even though the AO noise was somewhat mitigated, and actual CPU improvements do exist in 5.6, the Lumen team at Epic should be ashamed of their work. Lumen is a visual and performance embarrassment, and Lumen's team's complacency with software Lumen's quality drove them to waste development time and funds on research the game industry did not need. If you found this video educational, helpful, or even just interesting, make sure to hit that subscriber button, because the higher we get this number, the more it helps us strengthen the market for optimization and drives up the demand for better graphics. Because it takes several weeks for us to produce this kind of quality content, YouTube's revenue is not enough to sustain our efforts. So if you can, join our Patreon where you can get access to image comparisons and pipeline extracted frames. But if your budget is tight, we appreciate you just sharing our content on game/GameDev subreddits, Discord channels, and social media at least 3 times, which would greatly help our revenue enough to keep us afloat. Thank you so much for your positive support and viewership, and see you in the next video.